There we go. It says we are being recorded. And welcome everybody again tonight to our weekly class. The last thing that you expected to see when you signed up for an online class. But I have enjoyed the conversations that we've had every Tuesday night. We've gotten into some really good discussions. We've had some pretty good topics. And for the most part, the folks who have prepared us for the topics have done a pretty good job of setting the stage, and we just kind of see where it goes once we get on the call. Tonight we have, I'm going to hang on just a second here, make sure Kenneth is back into the call. One of the challenges about this kind of technology is that it really is dependent upon the internet service that you got at a particular moment in time, and so we do see from time to time on the calls people who are dropping off because the connection's not strong. And we kind of understand that we come and go, and that's okay. But I think Kenneth probably is back with us now. So let me start by introducing our special guest this evening to join us on the call. This is Mrs. Stephanie Bennett, or I should say soon-to-be Judge Stephanie Bennett. She has just recently been elected probate court judge for Sumter County, which means that if you are in Sumter County and you are interested in getting a concealed weapons permit, or if you're interested in probating a will, or I don't know what all the kinds of things are that they do, you'll have an opportunity to speak with Judge Bennett. But I've known her for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now, maybe, something like that. And she's always been very dependable to come and work with our current issues classes. Prior to being elected judge, she has served as an HR capacity with CASA, which is the Court-Appointed Special Advocates, which is a group that speaks up on behalf of kids who need representation in the courts. The volunteers go into the homes and observe things and talk with the kids and talk with the teachers and talk with the parents and help the judge get the information that he or she needs to make decisions that are important. And she worked with that. Prior to CASA, I ought to know this, and I'm drawing a blank right off.
I worked with Middle Flint Behavioral Health Care for several years.
Right. Okay.
In an HR manager role.
All right. And I have to say I'm ashamed to know that I don't really know anything about your educational background, although I assume that it is in HR because you've had so many HR roles that probably would make it easier to get those roles with that kind of a background.
That's correct. I actually got my bachelor's in business administration with an emphasis in human resources management here at Georgia Southwestern. Got my master's in business administration here at Georgia Southwestern. And then later got my master's in education because I just really wanted to be in school for the rest of my life. But at some point, my husband said, okay, go to work. So I did.
And ended up as a judge. I would imagine he's...
Yeah, it's crazy, but it all kind of circles around in some way or another. HR, I will say, HR to me is probably the most... It touches every single job out there in some way or another, whether you are working in human resources, whether you're a judge, whether you're working as a supervisor. The information and the education that you'll receive will take you very far, no question.
All right, let's see here. On top of that all, she and her husband have a son who is a little bit older than my little boy, and she has one niece who is in class with my youngest daughter, so we have some interactions there pretty frequently. And I guess that gives you a good enough overview as to what Stephanie's bringing to the conversation. And I'm going to get each one of you to introduce yourself real quick. Tell Stephanie or Judge Bennett, soon to be Judge Bennett, is it appropriate to call you Judge yet, just for practice?
Not yet, not until December. But I'm okay with it. I can't get Blake to call me honorable yet, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, I don't know that he'll ever call you honorable.
I don't think he will.
No, I remember a story one time when Rosalind Carter got an honorary doctorate at GSW, and what was the story? Somebody was joking with her and asked her if she was going to make Jimmy call her Dr. Carter.
Oh, wow.
And her response was something to the effect of, only when he makes me call him Mr. President.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Well, that's enough chit-chat, I guess. Let's, Amy, go ahead, introduce yourself to Stephanie. Give her your name and what your major is. If it is, I don't even know right off. It's probably HR for all of you because of the nature of this class, but how close you are to graduate.
All right, I'm Amy Clark. I'm currently in Leesburg, Georgia, and my major is currently HR, and hopefully I will be graduating at the end of this summer, if not the following fall.
Great.
All right, so it's not in the 50s of the days, but it's not too much more than single-digit months, hopefully.
Correct. Yes, sir.
All right, Kenneth.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Spry. I live in Atlanta, Georgia with my wife and two.
Drop.
Hey, uh-oh.
There you go. There, you're back.
I'm back. Okay, well, I live, work, play in Atlanta, and I will be graduating this coming December.
Great.
Okay.
53 days.
Amy and Kenneth are both either current or former military, and I always lose track of whether they're still active or reserves or whatnot, but both military backgrounds. That's always an interesting part of the conversation because they can bring the government side of it into the mix. All right, Lauren, your turn.
Hey, I'm Lauren, and my major is human resources, and I will be graduating in December.
All right, and you are in Americus, Leesburg.
I'm in Leesburg right now, but most of the time I'm actually in Americus across the street from Dr. Grimes.
Okay. You go over there a lot.
I'm over there quite a bit.
Okay. All right, good deal. And Morgan, your turn.
My name's Morgan Bell. I am from Sumner, Georgia. I got my associates in business administration, and I'm currently working on my bachelor's in human resource management, and I should be done in July, this July. So.
Good.
Great.
All right. Well, I do hope that all of you will give strong consideration to coming up to Americus and marching. I got a personal goal of never missing graduation. The only thing that'll get in the way is if I have a kid who's graduating somewhere else on the same day. But I like to see everybody. Most of the time when I walk through the line and shake hands, I don't even recognize you because everybody looks different in person than they do on the video calls. So sometimes you have to remember to say, oh, you remember me, I was in such and such. But I hope you'll come up and give me a chance to shake your hand and congratulate you. All right. Well, we'll turn it over to Kenneth for the first few comments as he gives us a little bit of an overview as to what we're talking about this week and sets the stage for what we'll be discussing on our phone call tonight. So, Kenneth, it's yours.
So the topic of the week is bullying. Pull my notepad over just a little bit. So the topic of the week is bullying, and the real gist of the articles that I sent through as references kind of defines vaguely what bullying is, and specifically what bullying looks like and what HR's role is in attempting to keep bullying / on the more extreme end, I think it's workplace violence, out of the workplace. It's important to us because bullying has an effect on a business's bottom line. If you have increased turnover, if you're having to go out and hire and rehire and then rescreen and then rehire, hiring people over and over isn't necessarily the solution. The solution is establishing policies that basically take care of the problem before it gets completely out of control. One of the interesting things that not necessarily too interesting, but 27 states have introduced legislation to kind of set set a policy that basically says, hey, you know, bullying in the workplace isn't going to fly. And the only state that has come remotely close to having something that sticks is California. The problem is it doesn't necessarily make bullying illegal or you know, something that you can go to jail over. It just mandates that, you know, companies will have training, and companies will have training, and it will be meaningful, though it doesn't really get into the weeds on what meaningful is. This is my last point. I think a lot of the difficulties in attempting to write a law or write legislation is that it butts up against other laws on the book, specifically the National Labor Relations Act. It's a give and take, and NLRA is on the books, and in reading the 5 articles and the other information that I dug up, I can see why it's going to be very difficult to get legislation passed, because you don't want to be the guy that, you know, let's say you just make an offhanded comment, somebody takes offense to it, then they file a complaint, and the next thing you know, you got fired because you pointed out somebody's red shoes, and nobody wants that.
Okay. All right, let me kind of open this up with a general question to the group here. What comes to mind when you hear the word bullying? What does that look like? If we were to try to pass a law or write a policy, what are we aiming for? Amy's unmuted her mic.
We're trying to create a workplace that creates a harassment-free environment, and that people can come to every day and feel free and welcome.
Okay.
But that may not necessarily be the idea, you know, that we're trying to strive. I mean, that's the purpose, but a policy may not necessarily be the right way to do it in certain aspects.
Okay. I would agree with you that the purpose is to create an environment where people don't feel pressured, perhaps, or don't feel intimidated by others, so that we can interact well and get a lot done. But back to the question that I was going at just a minute ago, what is bullying? What does it look like? What's the picture that comes into your mind when we say bullying?
I think of like just somebody who's like really intimidating and just like peer pressure almost, and I just think of somebody pushing somebody into a locker or a trash can in like high school or something. But I mean, that's what I think of.
Somebody that puts a dead mouse on your chair.
Yeah.
Consistently.
A dead mouse on your chair, okay. About Morgan, any thoughts?
Just basically singling one person out.
Okay. Tell me if the image is different for you, but when you say the word bully, I think of the kid who wants to be tough, who goes up to the small guy on the playground and grabs him by the collar and says, "Give me your lunch money," right? Or "I'm going to beat you to a pulp." That's what I think of with a bully. I mean, do we have that in the workplace? Why is this even a topic?
I think we have it in the workplace.
Okay.
Somebody that maybe intimidates others to do their work for them because maybe they aren't competent enough to do their work themselves.
Or maybe they're confident, but they're just lazy, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. Yeah. We kind of all have stereotypes, don't we, of what a bully is. And it probably is not that foreign to you, that picture that I just described, the little kid on the playground, "Give me your lunch money or I'm going to beat you up." And the kid really has no choice because he's intimidated by this bigger, aggressive person. But in the workplace, it may not be something along those lines, but there is an awful lot of, not maybe physical bullying perhaps, but a lot of emotional bullying, a lot of power play. Do you think that bullying is more frequently a worker who feels intimidated by his or her boss, as opposed to a worker who feels intimidated by a coworker who's on an even level?
I think it can be both.
Okay.
I was gonna say both, but I probably would have to lean more on the side of a coworker.
Okay. We could very easily have those same kinds of intimidation behaviors from boss to worker, but we may not instinctively think of that as bullying, because the boss has some legitimate authority to be able to kind of push you around, so to speak, and to make demands of you and to kind of harass you if you don't do the things that you're asked to do. That's part of being a boss to some degree. Certainly, we would hope that the boss doesn't abuse that and does it in a encouraging, building kind of way. So it can be kind of interesting sometimes when we talk about bullying in the workforce, that there may be those who instinctively think of, my boss, where some folks would say just a tough, no nonsense, let's get it done kind of person. Somebody else says, well, I just feel intimidated by that person all the time. But I would tend to think that, as several of you have said, that bullying tends to be more frequently coworkers. And it may be somebody who has a little bit of seniority, who tries to push the workload off onto somebody who doesn't know any better, or who is much more fearful of keeping their job. So what's HR's role?
Can I say something here, Mark?
Yeah, jump in.
I think that Kenneth made a good point. He kept several different times, he said, the way it's defined, and I think that's the piece here, is that you've got workplace bullying. It's got to be something that's persistent, that's ongoing. I know he mentioned maybe saying something about somebody's red shoes that may offend someone, but that wouldn't necessarily be what we would constitute as workplace bullying. And as you'll find out in human resources, a lot of times people will look at this as menial, trivial, will bring things saying it's bullying, and it's not. Something like that, when obviously you've got to make sure that it's defined for your employees and for your supervisors, so they understand if you're going to come to me with a complaint, it needs to be workplace bullying, and this is what workplace bullying is, if that makes sense. So I think the way he explained the definition is so important here. And then, of course, HR's role is, as with in many instances, is to create that policy, so it's understood throughout the organization. Make sure that your supervisors are trained on what it is and how it's to be handled. Same with your employees, and that to get management on board, a lot of times what you're going to have to do is look at the situations where it's high-level bullying, where it has reached what you would consider workplace violence, and maybe even constitute it into your workplace violence policy, where it's not just a workplace bullying policy, you have it as part of your workplace violence policy or a harassment policy. Management, this is probably going to be more low level for them when you as an HR manager bring it to their attention. So you've got to find a way to make it look, where you look at the more severe instances where they'll understand why it needs to be included.
Okay. What are the thoughts? Does bullying occur in most workplaces, do you think? Some form or fashion, some degree?
Yes. I guess I'll tell a C story real quick. When I first started working at the FAA here in Atlanta, I did my interview. Interview went okay. I showed up for work, and then I realized that the content and the context of what was described in the interview didn't necessarily match up with how the work got done at work. And I had a manager that would literally scream at me that the copier broke, and we have the phone number on there. You call them, they come out and fix it. And he blew his gasket over me calling to get the copier fixed, and I'm looking like, okay, maybe he just runs a tighter ship than I'm accustomed to. And about 3 months later, somebody accused him of sexual assault. The FAA did a full investigation, and come to find out, somebody had previously made a report, and it was well documented, all of the stuff that he had done up to that point. And they ended up letting him go, and because of the systemic problem through, I think it was 3 managers up, knew that this guy had a track record, but just failed to act, failed to do anything, and they completely cleaned house. That I say that because I'm more familiar with, you have a coworker. They may say stuff, they may do stuff. I remember when I was at Bahrain, I showed up, and there's a stigma with being a reservist that comes out for a short period of time. So you show up and they're just like, oh, absolutely nothing, you're completely worthless, go sit in the corner until we need you to do something. And the only way to gain their respect is to basically ignore it, persevere through, and then in time they turn. But I guess going back to square one, it's just like, should I have been subjected to that type of treatment? I want to say no, but at the same time, I know I kind of just went down the military route again, but at the same time, no, but kind of yes, but no.
No, but kind of yes, but no. Okay. I'm right there with you. What makes it tough to create a policy about bullying? If bullying occurs, and we ought to do something about it, if you went out and surveyed 1,000 businesses, you might find a very small percentage that actually have a policy about that. Why don't they have it?
It's not clearly defined, so it's difficult to create a policy that's not clearly defined.
Okay, good. And when you say it's not clearly defined, elaborate just a little bit.
Well, for instance, we know what discrimination is, and we know what harassment is based on EEO. For instance, if I go in and I say that I'm being harassed, usually it's based on a protected class. Like, for instance, I'm being harassed because I'm a female, and so that's clearly defined. Whereas if I say I'm being bullied by my coworkers because I'm not carrying my weight in the performance, I may say that I'm being bullied just because they're wanting me to carry my own weight, when that's not really being bullied. It's just maybe they're following up with me on different tasks, and I may state that I'm being bullied, but it's a perception issue there. So without it being clearly defined, it's very difficult to create a policy there.
Okay. Let me throw in one clarification though. You use terms like discriminated and harassed, and from my perspective, the protected class would line up better with discrimination. Harassment would be more defined as unwelcome and unwanted, which is subjective. Somebody may find something unwelcome and unwanted, and somebody else might find the same thing no problem. But that's getting closer to what bullying is. It's really kind of in the eye of the receiver, isn't it? And one of the challenges with creating a policy, as you said, is being able to define it. How do we know it when we see it? If somebody claims it, how do we verify that it really is bullying, versus just grow up a little bit and get a little tougher skin, because that's part of life. That's part of the culture. Kenneth.
Well, I would still co-sign on what Amy just said, because it's, I mean, looking at my own example, at my own example, if I were somebody a lot more sensitive, they may have run and told right off the rip. But me, I've been around the block a couple times. I'm not necessarily going to cry if somebody, says some cuss words at me. Um, so I say that on the premise of going, if you have somebody that said something crazy or said something that offends you, and to a reasonable person, that context of that speech is harassing, I guess, is probably a better word that I would use if I didn't want to say bullying. Whoever is tasked to follow up on it may substantiate it and say, hey, you're a little overboard.
Okay. Somebody made the comment earlier that it is repeated over time, and that's an important distinction to make when we're talking about this. Just because somebody cussed you out one day, they just may have been in a bad mood, or they may have gotten chased down the street by the dog or something, or somebody almost sideswiped them getting to work. One event does not necessarily make bullying. It's a repeated behavior over time. That's part of the thing that we've got to communicate in the policies that we write. Amy's got her hand up.
Yeah, Kenneth says he's been around the block a few times. I think that is a good point that I heard in between the lines there is, for instance, civilians that work within the military. People that have prior service have been used to getting yelled at, cuss words, different things like that. But when we work within the military ranks, a lot of times somebody in uniform may talk to a civilian just like they would with somebody that's in uniform. And a lot of times I deal with the fact that civilians, like, they're bullying, but they're actually not. They're just their normal self. So it's not that they're treating anybody any differently. That's just how they are. But the civilian takes it as though they're bullying them. But it's really it's the environment. So having it clearly defined is very important.
Okay. One challenge with that task of clearly defining is that there are so many different ways that bullying could appear. We've got to be a little generic in terms of how we define it, because we certainly can't list all of the different possibilities.
And we could, but something such as, behavior that's creating an intolerable workplace,
Okay.
for you.
All right. I see where Ashley Bundrick was able to join us. How are you doing tonight? Don't forget to unmute your mic. Ashley, you on the call?
I think she's on her cell phones. I'm not sure how it's working.
Okay. All right. Looks like she has joined the call, so if nothing else, she's at least able to listen to it a little bit. All right. I have a very good friend who works with the Phoebe Health System, and she has been in her general role. She's progressed through the ranks, but she's been in her general role in her department for probably close to 20 years. And she tells the story about how in the first 5 to 10 years of her tenure there in her role, she was bullied incessantly. And there were a lot of days where she just went home and said, I'm not doing this anymore. And tomorrow I'm going to go in and turn in my notice. And then something would happen that would kind of change her mind. But she put up with it for a long time. And she saw this particular person bullying other people, not just her. And one of the challenges that she had was getting folks with some degree of authority to recognize what was going on and to validate that, because this was a reasonably good employee, and we don't really want to think the worst of some of our best employees. We kind of want to brush it off, or, you guys got to figure out a way to get along, or that kind of thing. And the short story to that, short ending to that story is that over the last few years, she has taken it upon herself to try to create a bullying policy for the hospital system. And when I was with the system 4 or 5 years ago, she and I worked on that together on the wording and what do we need to include. And she did so much research and reading and looking online at other policies at different places and came up with an amazing policy, but had a really, really hard time getting senior management to buy into it. And she has been frustrated time after time where they've said, okay, let's start to try to roll this thing out and let's start teaching folks what this is and how to look and address it and deal with it. And right as she was getting into it, they say, no, let's hold off a little bit. There's a better time to do this. And so she'd get into it and she'd stop, and she'd get into it and she'd stop. And just a couple of weeks ago, she emailed me and said that she's been given the green light again. So she's going to see how far she can get with it this time. But one of the things that she talks about in her story is that a lot of times bullies do that because they can get away with it. And it makes their life a little easier if they can get the one who's being bullied to go along with the bullying, just to take it. But what typically happens is that it's a marginal employee who does the bullying, and it's some of our better employees who get bullied. And they end up doing the work, as I think Stephanie has mentioned, they end up doing the work of 2 or 3 people because they're doing their work plus the work that the bully keeps throwing off on them. So what happens in the long term if this bullying continues?
Your best employees end up resigning or leaving.
Absolutely. Your best employees end up leaving. Why?
Because they don't want to be there anymore. The environment, I guess, would they consider it like a hostile environment?
Sure.
Yeah, in some regards, that is absolutely true. So yeah, that's the long-term outcome is that your better employees leave. And who does that leave you with?
Well, I think they feel like they don't have a voice because there is no way of bringing that to their supervisor's attention or bringing it to management's attention if there's no policy in place.
Yeah.
So there's, they don't know how to go about. So what you find is you're not only, even when they don't leave, they're taking more sick leave, they're stressed, there's more anxiety. So even if there's hidden costs to this sort of thing as well.
Okay, good point. So our better people either leave because they're tired of it, and I don't have to deal with this anymore. I can go get another job where I'm not bullied, or they stick it out, but they're not as effective.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Absolutely.
what happens if they leave? Kenneth.
You got to start the whole hiring process over again to replace them, and you may not get a one-for-one replacement. It may take you 2 years to get them back to the point that the guy or gal that just left, if they were, the top notch, it may take you a while to get that new person back up to speed. And oh, by the way, you still got a bully that's there. So the new person may get there, hang around for, let's say, 3-4 months before they turn around and leave. I mean, it's a possibility.
Oh yeah, I think that's quite real. I think one of the stark realities is that bullies bully. I mean, it's not like they pick a target, and if that target leaves, they're not going to bully anymore. They bully because that's who they are. And so when that person leaves, they just shift the target of their bullying to somebody else because that's who they are. And they may be bullying several people at one time, and if you leave, I just start bullying somebody else because that's what's comfortable for me. That's what's gotten me through this so this long. And so we develop a culture of bullies in a lot of cases. If I'm bullied pretty consistently and I'm going to stick it out, I may end up bullying somebody else to alleviate some of my workload. And what happens when that bully eventually leaves? Kenneth.
The number 2 steps into his place.
That's quite possible.
And then while you were saying that, the thing that popped into my head is, the new guy in the office. I guess depending on the workplace, the new guy has an uphill climb, so to speak, to gain a little respect, either until the next new guy comes or until they leave and a brand new guy comes.
Okay. Who do you think the target is of a bully? How would you define that person, or characterize them if you were to profile them? I guess is the word I'm looking for from Criminal Minds. How would you profile the target of the bully?
Maybe like a weaker person.
Okay, maybe weaker. Okay.
I almost would say almost like the new person, because they're going to be more vulnerable and to like the environment, because they're new and they might not know what to expect. So somebody could come up to him and be like, "Oh, well, this is what you're supposed to do," and it be like completely not what you're supposed to do. If that makes any sense. Maybe like the newbie.
All right. What else might you use as a description for the person who gets bullied? Ashley.
Maybe just anyone who's an outsider of whatever the majority group is. So someone different from the general workforce.
All right. What other thoughts? Why I'm kind of going this direction is, if we start thinking like HR, if we start thinking like managers, and we become aware that bullying does exist, one of our challenges is not only to figure out who the bullies are, but who the ones are that are bullied. And if we can kind of begin to see some common themes among people who tend to get bullied, we can kind of keep an eye on them and watch out for them. Kenneth had his hand up a moment ago.
Somebody might have said it while I conked out. I was going to say, somebody that has like a timid personality, somebody that's not very strong-willed. I mean, I don't want to say weak, but, if they're not out there, they're quiet, they keep to themselves, they could possibly be picked on.
Okay. And I would say let's be a little bit careful with adjectives like timid or quiet. It could be somebody who could be very outspoken, who's not necessarily timid. I would think somebody who is likely to be bullied is somebody who's very agreeable, somebody who is very team-oriented. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm going to go above and beyond when I'm needed. That's the person that's easy to take advantage of. And they may be very strong personalities. But if I'm a bully and I want to kind of offload some of my work, it might not necessarily be the quietest one that I go bully. It may be the one that is willing to say yes, because that's just who they are. They like to please. They like to be seen as part of a team. They like to be seen as being capable. I heard it said one time, I guess it was back when I was in college, that if you have something important that you need to get done, the person you need to turn to is the person who's the busiest, the person who's overloaded, because they've already demonstrated that they can handle it. So what happens to that person who's overloaded? She gets one more big task. And if that person is likely to say yes because they want to please, they want to make you happy, they want to be compliant, they can feel overwhelmed very quickly. Now, all of those answers are probably in large degrees and in various circumstances correct. It can be that the quiet one is frequently bullied. It can be that the timid one is frequently bullied. But there are some commonalities to all of those adjectives, aren't there? They're probably not as strong a force of character, which was something that somebody suggested. Kenneth, what were some of the questions that you had on your preliminary notes there? And we kind of talked about a lot of that. Got a finger up. Don't have your mic open.
Yeah, when my desktop crashed out, it took everything with it. To potential. We have touched on not having a policy in place. We generally answered that question. What are some of the concerns that senior management would have regarding implementing? No, that's not the right question. No, actually, no, that was the right question because we kind of answered that one as well. With the example you gave with your friend at the hospital who's trying to get it off the ground, where the bullying policy it's not one of those top priority things at the moment, and it can easily be shelved, and so HR can shift its gears to something else. The fire of the moment. Would a bullying policy be feasible? Well, we kind of touched on that. Is there a feasible alternative to having a bullying policy or law on record? Feasible alternative. I mean, I guess we talked about like what a bullying policy would need to generally include, but that maybe that question hasn't necessarily been answered.
Let me there for a second. Let's get a couple of thoughts on one thing here. We've talked about various states that are looking at creating state-level laws about bullying. Is that an effective way to do it, or should something like this happen at the organizational level? You know, in some regards, we talk about whether something should be at the federal level or the state level. This question really is, to me, should there be bullying laws at the federal level or the state level, or should the state say, we're not going to get into this, you as an organization need to figure out what your own policies are?
I don't necessarily believe that we should attempt to legislate the office environment to that degree. I think it's a little bit of an overreach because again, your interpretation of what you consider to be bullying and Amy's interpretation is different. That individual company should have a policy that outlines, you know, very generally, hey, this is what we consider to be bullying, and this is what we will do. These are some of the consequences that will happen if you're exhibiting these characteristics or you're doing something of this nature. You know, well, I guess the thing that pops into my mind next is, you know, somebody gets bullied and then the police show up to the office and now you have 5 or 6 people getting arrested. That doesn't necessarily bode well for the company either. I know that's an extreme, but, you know, 5 people get arrested out of the office and now you got to shut down operations because you've got a bullying problem.
Okay. So I might agree with you that bullying doesn't need to be addressed from a local or a state level in terms of legislation. It might be more effective to have it dealt with on a company by company level, because you as an organization might have a different outlook on it than another organization, and you might put a different penalty on it than somebody else does. When you start getting to the level of legislation, everybody has to do it the same way. And, you know, the second time that you're accused of bullying, you're fired. Well, that may not be what works well with our corporate culture.
I would agree with that. I mean, when you mention the culture, again, you can look at the military. I think you're going to have, and I believe there was one of the articles mentioned that there were certain breeding grounds for bullying. There are going to be some cultures that are going to be more accepting of that sort of thing. Right or wrong, I don't think it's a good idea to limit yourself to to laws or necessarily proposed laws. To me, it's an organizational issue. The biggest problem with bullying is that it oftentimes tends to elevate to something where there is a law, whether it's wrongful discharge for some reason, wrongful termination, whether it's workplace violence. The problem with bullying is it oftentimes, because it's persistent and continues and causes anxiety and stress, or may cause anxiety and stress, it ultimately becomes a bigger problem that is protected by law. So I think if you can handle it at the lower level, then you will, you certainly can ward off some of those bigger problems.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think from the perspective that you're the one being bullied, the first time or two, you just kind of get frustrated and you go home and you vent a little bit. But if it goes on day after day after day, like that little kid in the schoolyard, eventually what happens? Eventually you just snap and you slug somebody, or you go home and you can't get that gun and you go postal, as the expression is. And you're right, if it's not checked somehow, it very frequently can turn into something that we already have laws for.
Yeah, and I think that's your best, personally, just my opinion, I think that's your best way of presenting it to management, where they don't just keep, like your friend, oh yeah, present that to us, bring it to, get some information together. They don't continue to throw it out because you've brought it to their attention, saying, here's what's going to happen if we don't, even if we just intertwine it in some of our other policies, harassment policies or workplace violence policies that most companies have. I think that's going to be your best bet in getting some buy-in from management. We'll at least give it a try.
What do you think are some of the reasons why senior management would be reluctant to really consider this? Anybody? You go into work one day and you say, you know what, I think we need an anti-bullying policy. What kind of reaction does senior management have?
I think some senior management would be reluctant that they be consistent with.
Say that over again. I lost you in the middle.
Okay. I think that they would be reluctant because it's another policy that they would have to hold their employees accountable to and be consistent and monitor the workforce. And some managers feel like they have enough to do just keeping the organization running.
Okay. Do you think that your typical upper manager would immediately say, yeah, you know what, we probably have a problem with bullying in this organization?
No, I think that they would probably think it's not an issue and therefore the policy isn't needed.
All right, and why would they think that?
Because issues haven't been brought to their attention.
Okay, what else?
Handled at a lower level.
There's one really, really big reason why they may not be quick to agree to the claim that we have bullying.
If we admit to anything, we're putting the company at litigation risk.
That's a big part of it. I'm thinking of another one still. To me, this is the super obvious one. Ashley.
Because it's definitely not happening to them if they're upper management.
There you go. You go into work one day and you say, we really need a policy about bullying. Immediately the CEO says, I've never been bullied. The CFO says, I don't know where you're coming from. No, I have not seen any bullying. The likelihood is that they may be part of the bullying because that's their role as an authoritative figure, but they don't get bullied. And yeah, there could be, if we kind of hope it goes away or pretend like it doesn't exist, maybe we can survive a little while, but the moment we really start focusing on this, we might be opening ourselves up for some litigation. Lauren.
I was just gonna kind of go off what you said there too. They kind of like, if they don't necessarily see it happening either, they're not gonna be as prone to do it because they're gonna be like, oh well, I don't see it happening, and they might not believe that person until they actually see it with their own eyes. And if there's no proof there, then they don't have any reason to.
And why do you think they may not see it happening?
because they're not out there. They're in their office. And
Right. They're probably in their office an awful lot. Yeah.
Well, I think it, again, right there comes back to culture again. When I work with companies with the CEO and the CFO, they really treated each other pretty badly in a lot of situations, but it was almost like that's just how we communicate. We're in high stress jobs. We get paid plenty of money. So as long as they're paying me to do this, you can treat me however you want. I mean, believe it or not, that's kind of the way that they, the level of responsibility I have, it's okay for somebody to treat me that way, which, in a lot of situations would be mind-boggling, but it is. And they don't look at what the person sitting at the receptionist desk may be dealing with, because they expect that sort of treatment from people that they work with.
Okay. One other thought that comes to my mind is this question. How many of you have ever worked for an organization where they use terms like family? This is a family. We're family. Coming in here is like going to work with your family. Kenneth raised his hand there.
One of the best commands that I ever worked for was out of DC. So the leader of the organization, which would kind of be like the CEO, he's an admiral. One of the things that was super cool, he would do these town hall meetings where everybody would come up to the 14th floor, the top floor, and he'd just sit down and he'd have a conversation with everybody. And the previous admiral that was there, it didn't have that feeling, but the new guy, he kind of gave you that, hey, if you have an issue, come talk to me. If you're feeling bad about something, let your manager know. If you need to take some time off, hey, take your time off, take care of your family. It seemed like there was a sense of care, and things just seemed a whole lot better under that umbrella. And I didn't feel as though, like, I was getting treated bad. I never felt like I was being treated horrible or that I was less of a person because I didn't sit on the 14th floor.
Okay. Kenneth, your mic's gone off.
Oh,
Now
good.
it's back. Now it's back.
So yeah, those types of environments is awesome, and it just seems like everybody fed off of his positivity.
Okay. I think one of the big challenges that we have as HR when we're trying to build a case for something like this, or to create some agreement that this is necessary, are some of the things that we've talked about. The senior managers probably don't see it happening. Senior managers aren't the victims of it. Senior managers might think immediately in terms of liability, but also an awful lot of organizations, the senior managers want to be able to describe this to folks as a family atmosphere where we care about each other and we support each other. And the idea of bullying and the idea of families don't really go together very well. I mean, our kids do pick on each other, but we wouldn't use the term bullies to describe them. Bully is what you do to somebody that's your adversary. And that doesn't exist in a family. So it can be a real challenge sometimes with upper management to say, you know what, we throw around terms like family, but that's not the way it is all the time everywhere. And we need to be awake and aware that this kind of stuff happens in our organization, in our little family. We've got to really keep an eye on the ones that are not the family members, so to speak. Kenneth.
But in hearing you say that, I think it goes back to an earlier point about culture. If the culture of the organization is that, hey, we're a family, and like the top of the organization is saying that, you got the middle managers that are emulating what top level management is doing. It trickles down, and I can only say that because I've seen it firsthand, to where you have a you have an organization, and one day it's like you need to watch your P's and Q's, and the new guy comes in, and within the course of 6 weeks, it's like, oh man, this place went from to awesome in 2 months. But that's because the culture and the culture of the organization has an effect on whether or not bullying is how pervasive bullying can actually be, because it may be to the point where somebody starts to get on that trip, and then let's say their peers and coworkers is just like, yo man, chill, that's not even necessary here.
All right. Well, we're right up on 9 o'clock, and we kind of need to wrap up our call so that y'all can get back to more important things, studying and family time and whatnot, and we need to let Stephanie get back to her family. But as we close this out, let's just think big picture about our topic of bullying. If that becomes an issue that our HR needs to deal with, what are the things that we need to be thinking about? What are the questions that we need to ask? What are the questions that we need to anticipate senior management asking us that we got to be ready to answer? Ashley.
How are we going to define bullying?
Okay, that's going to be a big question we have to answer. How do we go about doing that?
I would elaborate, and I would say it's kind of a mess in some of the school systems where they have like these zero tolerance policies, and people are getting in trouble for the tiniest infractions, and it's very subjective how people feel versus how big of a deal other people really view it. So I think that how we're going to define it and what guidelines we're going to set, they're going to be a really big deal.
Okay, good. What else?
I just want to say I think that's a really good point. I think that's going to be something that when you look at something like bullying, to me, in a manager role, I think one of the things I'd be concerned about is just frivolous complaints that are going to come up, things that just are very trivial, getting lumped into this bullying policy. So that would be one of the questions I would have, and I think that's very similar to what she's talking about as far as zero tolerance is very difficult to. You can define it very easily, but in reality, it's not easy.
Okay. What else do you anticipate from senior management? And let's don't think about it from the perspective of your HR trying to anticipate senior management. Let's look at it from the role that you are senior manager, and HR is making this presentation. What do you want to know? You want to know how we're going to define it? Sure. How we're going to recognize it when we see it? Yeah, Amy.
Maybe what the penalty would be if there's an offense.
Okay. Right. We're not going to get into it in this class, but it's becoming more and more common in organizations to have a progressive disciplinary policy. So where does this fall on the progression? And what about reoccurrences of the same kind of thing? Does the punishment get more severe over time with repeated infractions? That's going to be a big part of it, yeah. What do we do when it happens? How do we define it? What does it look like? What do we do when it happens? One thing that goes along with that idea about the frivolous, what do we do if it's a baseless claim? What do we do if it turns out that we would say that really wasn't bullying, the boy who cried wolf? All right, Stephanie, in a sum up here, would you say that HR is never easy?
It is never, ever easy. It is as gray can be.
It's always a little bit more complicated than we want it to be.
It always depends.
It always depends. All right.
So true.
Very good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and shut off our recording. Hopefully y'all forgot it was even recording and it hasn't impacted